Hey everyone, it's time for another story. Before we start, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on the bell to not miss any updates and comment on which manhwas you want to see here. Let's go and dive into the story. Activate the Strongest Collection system and get a new status every week. Some people are ordinary students on the surface, but behind the scenes they're the president of a multinational group, an incomparable genius doctor, a chef who drives the world crazy, the world's greatest assassin, and an excellent hypnotist. In short, they wear countless vests. Sui-sun. I really just want to be an ordinary person. Why is it so hard? And this is the question that will remain standing until the end of this story, full of twists and turns. Let's go. The story begins with a young man throwing money at the protagonist, claiming he's a poor bastard from a small county in the 18th level. He claims he has enough pocket money for the protagonist to spend for a year, saying that all the money he threw the protagonist belongs to him, and tells him to get out, reminding him to stay away from Anjiji from now on, saying that the protagonist is not from the same world as them, calling the protagonist poor. While watching from a distance, one of the young men there thinks to himself, how could someone like him dare to get involved with Wang Zheng, the most admired girl in the class? The protagonist has no idea that her uncle is the vice director. 1 point up. The others wonder, how could Anjiji fall in love with the protagonist? It made no sense to them. If the protagonist was that poor, they imagined he'd probably be cleaning dishes every day just to survive and earn some money. Then Mr. Lai enters through the door, accompanied by 2 bodyguards and another man. Soon, the man asks for Mr. Lai to enter as Sui-sun is there. He says he doesn't know what he did to offend him. One of the students wonders if the person who just entered is Mr. Lai from Kingyun International. He claims that the professor talked about his case in class yesterday. Another student confirms that it's Mr. Lai and says that he also has an impression. He's the key figure in a leading company in Jiangzhou province. How did he end up in their school? Soon Mr. Lai and the bodyguards bow to the protagonist and say that the group is unstable. He asks him to return and preside over the situation as quickly as possible, since Mr. King International needs him. The man who entered with Mr. Li and his bodyguards asks him if the protagonist is someone from his group. He says he's mistaken, claiming that the protagonist is just a poor student, a small nobody. Furious, Mr. Lai says the protagonist is the only heir to Kingyun International, and tells the man how dare he say such nonsense. What nonsense, huh? Soon the young man who had thrown money at the protagonist earlier asks if this is a joke, saying the protagonist can't be the heir. Immediately, the protagonist goes to him, slaps him in the face, and says he's saying, how can a bird understand the will of a swan? Then he calls the young man stupid. For no reason, the protagonist goes to the blonde-haired girl, pulls her by the waist, kisses her in front of everyone, and walks away right after. Crying, the young man says this isn't bullying. While the girl is happy with the kiss she received from the protagonist, as he walks through the corridor, some students call the protagonist a poor bastard, and wonder how he could have become the heir of Kingyun International. Soon, one of the bodyguards tells the young man to shut up and says he's not allowed to call the protagonist Sui-sun. Only call him Mr. Su. Much more elegant. Minutes ago, the protagonist was just a poor student, but 20 minutes ago, something happened that changed his life completely. After seeing a news story on his phone that suddenly, Zhao Chengming, president of Kingyun International, died in a car accident this morning, and the most powerful enterprise in the province would probably cause a huge shock. Soon, the protagonist says that all the mess doesn't matter to him anyway. Then he gets hit on the head by a little paper ball, and a young man approaches the protagonist, saying that his mate is back to help him. The protagonist then finds the blonde-haired young woman sitting right in front of him. As he rests his head on the desk, the protagonist calls the young woman annoying. Then the young man questions the protagonist, asking why so many people in class are using their phones, but the monitor only notices him. He says that she has been interested in him since the first year of college, but the protagonist can't see it. He adds that it's good to give some reaction to people sometimes. The protagonist asks his friend if he's obligated to accept that she's interested in him. His friend says yes, that many people envy the protagonist, a guy who doesn't realize the blessing he has. Thinking that he couldn't possibly know, the protagonist says that he has no capital to fall in love. Sad reality. Soon the system congratulates the protagonist for activating the Strongest Collection connection system. With the successful system binding, it shows that the protagonist can randomly select a new identity every Monday. By activating the exclusive task and completing it, the protagonist will randomly and permanently acquire the skill of that identity. Curious, the protagonist asks, extract identity? Soon, the system shows that the protagonist can say the command extract identity to get the identity for the week. The extraction is successful, and the host obtains the identity, president of Kingyun International. Superficially, the protagonist is an ordinary university student, but secretly he has an unknown identity, the sole heir of Kinyan International. The last president died. Today, the protagonist will officially take the front seat and assume the role, with the identity ability, business acumen, boss demeanor, and a calm personality. Identity and task. Zhao Chengming, president of Kinyan International, died in a car accident. As a young president, the protagonist will face the situation of being replaced by the vice director as soon as he takes over. The system asks the protagonist to investigate the truth about Zhao Chengming's death within a month and recover the power of the group. Back to real life, the professor tells the students to leave the classroom as they are dismissed. Scared after reading all that information, sweating cold, the protagonist thinks he was dreaming. Soon, the squad leader goes to the protagonist, puts her hand on his chest, and asks why the protagonist is ignoring her. Here she reacted. The protagonist says that he's going through some confusion right now and isn't available for a conversation. Then that young man from the beginning of the story asks the protagonist if he forgot what he said about staying away from Z. He questions if the protagonist can't understand people's words. Then the story continues with the protagonist inside a limousine with Mr. Lai. The protagonist thinks that this really created an identity for him. Even the memories of related characters can be altered. He thinks about how fun that is. At the company, a red-haired woman tells the man who just received the news that Lai Tao has taken Suzan back from the school, and their people were one step behind. Then the man replies to the woman, telling her to immediately take back what she said and just withdraw it. He's just a hairy kid and can afford many problems. He claims that now no one will be able to stop him. He became a machine. Soon Mr. Lai tells the protagonist that this is the second person from Manhwa, the vice president of the group. He clarifies that originally, after the accident, Mr. Zhao was the most promising candidate to succeed the president. Since Mr. Zhao transferred all the shares to his name in the grieving family, he couldn't take the position without problems. The protagonist asks Mr. Lai if Manhwa hates him. Mr. Lai responds saying that Manhwa is notoriously ruthless in the group. There were several executives who turned against him and then disappeared. After all, the protagonist is a university student, so Mr. Li asks him to be careful. The protagonist then says that he needs to meet Manhwa. He says that now the board is waiting for him in the conference room and claims that he should inform and greet everyone at the gate. Mr. Lai tells the driver to turn right at the upcoming intersection, and they will have a cup of milk tea. Refueling is important, right? At the company before the protagonist arrives, Zhu Chuan says that they were told to come down and meet the protagonist. It's already half the day, and he asks if the protagonist is playing with them for making them wait there almost the whole day. Soon, the man there asks Zhou Chuan to shut up and says that the order came from the president of the company they work for. He says that no one is too big or too small, and if he doesn't want to work, he should leave. One of the men there says that a university student can't become president. He says they are all crazy. Without capacity, without qualifications, he questions why the protagonist should be president. In his opinion, only Mr. Chen is expected to take the role. Two other men agree and say that Director Chen must be the president of Kinyan International. That gentleman who had been listening to the whole conversation says that they are all wrong. He says that Mr. Zhou's bones are not even fried yet, and they refuse to carry out his will. The man beside the gentleman says that the person chosen by Mr. Zhou must have superiority. Teasing the gentleman, one of the men says he's a stubborn old man and the greatest plague of the company. Another man tells him to hurry up and leave. He claims that the gentleman has lost all his teeth and is still there. How embarrassing. Not sure what's worse here. Soon the protagonist arrives, claiming that everyone is really here. Then Manhwa approaches the protagonist and greets him, saying that he's waited for him. The protagonist says that he knows the vice president. He says that he has heard a lot about him. One of the gentlemen there says that it's no wonder the protagonist is so late. He must have been having milk tea. He advises the protagonist to go back to school and play. He says the shopping mall is like a battlefield and claims that this place is not where he should stay. Mocking, the protagonist asks Vice President Chen if he's new here and doesn't know the situation. He asks if that gentleman is his dog. Soon, Chen responds, saying that the protagonist can't say that, claiming that the gentleman is not a dog. Furious upon hearing that, the gentleman asks the protagonist to say that again. The protagonist then slaps him in the face and says that he's not Vice President Chen's dog, and yet he dares to bark at him. The protagonist claims he should be beaten. Everyone there is in disbelief after seeing that scene. Now the circus is on fire. Soon, the protagonist says that there will be a meeting in the conference room in 5 minutes and that everyone there is dismissed. Seeing that scene, Chen thinks the protagonist isn't playing by the rules. He decides to follow him and play a good game. Entering the company and meeting a woman, the protagonist's secretary, Tigo Yu, greets him. She is introduced as absolutely reliable and says that she can do anything the protagonist wants. Soon, the protagonist asks her to prepare 3 cups of tea for him in the conference room. In the conference room, the protagonist says he is very satisfied to see everyone there at the time he requested. Then he introduces himself to everyone and says his name is Suigzun, and that he is the president of Kingyun International from now on. Soon, one of the men there says he has an opinion about the protagonist's succession. Furious, the protagonist throws one of the cups of tea that was on the table and asks the man if his parents didn't teach him not to interrupt others. Returning to the conversation, the protagonist continues saying that he's the president from today onward. He says that today they will talk about Yuan. He then asks who supports him and who is against him. Did he just make an election this easy? The protagonist then says that if anyone has something to say, they should just speak up, as he's a very calm person. Looking at the protagonist, one of the gentlemen thinks that although the protagonist is young, his aura is very unusual. He thinks that President Zhao chose him as his successor, and he definitely did make a mistake. Soon, Chen says that since the protagonist spoke, he will share his thoughts. The protagonist tells Chen to go ahead and speak. Chen tells the protagonist that he is young and talented, and that he will achieve great accomplishments by joining the Kingyun group, and that he is welcome. He says that there are tens of thousands of workers throughout the Kingyun group, and convincing a few of them is useless. He then says that if the protagonist wants, he can first make a notable accomplishment. For example, if he accepts that large order from the Jiaxin group, everyone in the company will definitely be convinced of his ability. Furious, Mr. Lai bangs on the table asking if Chen is joking, saying that everyone knows the Jiaxin group and they are mortal rivals. He claims that Chen is asking the protagonist to go to them to sign the contract. How could this be done? Furious, Chen asks who the hell Mr. Lai is and how dare he shout at him. Soon, Chen throws a glass of water toward Lai. With quick reflexes, the protagonist catches the glass. Chen then says that the protagonist has a lot of courage. He says that it shouldn't take too long and asks the protagonist for 1 month. The protagonist then says only 1 week and that the meeting is adjourned. Chen is shocked to hear that the protagonist gave him only 1 week. It felt like summer, 7 days. Soon the protagonist says that Liao should follow him. Laughing, Chen says that this is expected from the protagonist. He says that they need to make a deal. Then Chen thanks Liao for inviting him there. He says that this allows them both to properly appreciate the birth of an idiot. Suvan, a young man who was there, says that fighting with Mr. Chen is like seeking death. Another asks if a boy who hasn't even grown his hair knows what a business war is. Then a fourth person says that this makes people laugh loudly. The crowd is in disbelief. That gentleman asked another how Mr. Zhao could have chosen that fool to be president. The second gentleman says that unfortunately, the momentum is gone and tells him to enjoy it and prepare to resign. Investigating, the protagonist says that he needs to find Mr. Su to tell him exactly how Mr. Zhao died. He says that Mr. Zhao had a car accident and that the police already identified him. The protagonist then asks him to describe the accident in detail. He knows that if it was just a simple car accident, the system wouldn't let him investigate. He then says that Zhao was on his way to the office by car this morning when he died in a collision with a dump truck at an intersection. He says that the dump truck driver was transporting waste out of the area at that time every day, so it wasn't a deliberate hit and run. The protagonist asks where the driver of that truck is now. He soon gets the answer that the driver is under police control and should still be at the police station. The protagonist says he wants him to go to the police station immediately, pressure the driver, and never let him have an accident. Startled, Sue asks if something happened and claims that the protagonist suspects something. The protagonist says that for him, it's not about fearing 10,000, but fearing the what-if soon. Stu says he understands and will go immediately. The secretary arrives at the protagonist's office and says that the information on Ascension, the president of the Jiaxin group, is all there. Reading the information, the protagonist says it feels like he's heard that name somewhere before. Upon seeing the young blonde woman from the beginning of the story, the protagonist says it can't be such a coincidence. He's already on alert. While exiting the shower and drying her hair, the young blonde woman asks someone if they're saying that Suk-sun is really the president of Kingyun International. She says that this could still be fake, instantly going from poor student to very rich and handsome. She then wakes up her roommate and says it's her turn. Her roommate says she's so angry because the protagonist smiled at her 2 days ago. She should have known. The young blonde woman then tells her roommate that she will go out for a moment. While walking down the street, she is hugged from behind by the protagonist, but gets startled not knowing who it is. She then performs a judo throw on the protagonist, and upon realizing it's him, she apologizes. The protagonist says it's fine, but that was a tough move. She then tells the protagonist who told him to try approaching her like that. The protagonist then asks why she wants to hold him for a back hug, but didn't react when he kissed her in front of everyone. A reaction everyone expected. She says she didn't expect that kiss since the protagonist avoided her for so many years, ever since she was a child, and now he's acting like this. The protagonist says he was a poor boy, unable to bring her happiness. But from today onward, he is no longer the same Su-Zun. Then he says he gives everything to her and loves her boldly. This leaves the young woman totally emotional and happy. Touching her face, the protagonist asks her not to cry. He then says he has one more thing to ask her. He then questions if her father is the president of the Jaishin Group. She says yes. He started his own business 5 years ago and founded the Jaishin Group and claims it was the TV that told him all of this, right? She asks the protagonist if he doesn't remember. Trying to hide it, he says he remembers. Of course he remembers. Soon, the protagonist says he needs her father's help now to get a solid position at Kingyun International, so, almost finishing what he was about to say, the protagonist gets a call. Upon answering, the protagonist is informed that the driver who killed Mr. Zhao committed suicide. He then asks where the man who is speaking to him on the phone is now and says he's heading there immediately. The young woman asks the protagonist if he's leaving. Quickly, the protagonist says he'll pick her up tomorrow morning and runs off. Angry at the protagonist's half-hearted words, the young blonde woman says she hates things that are half done. While running back to the company, the protagonist passes through an avenue without looking around, and soon 2 cars crash in front of him, startling him. After the scare, the protagonist says he narrowly escaped. Soon Mr. Lai sticks his head out of the window of the black car and asks if the protagonist is okay, just confirming. At the company, Liao Jun tells Chen that the driver made a mistake and that Zhou suddenly appeared and saved the protagonist's life. Chen says he doesn't care and just wants to genuinely scare the protagonist. He claims that 2 consecutive presidents were run over, and that he's not that stupid. Then Chen says that Jonite is a warning, but hopes he knows how to pinch his tail a bit. In another room, the protagonist also says that Jonite was a warning, reminding the protagonist to tighten his rear. And an elegant warning indeed. Furious, Mr. Lai says that if he hadn't arrived in time, the consequences would have been. The protagonist says it's fine and asks Lai to tell his side of the story. Lai then says the driver was already under control, but he really committed suicide in the detention center. By the time Lai arrived, he was already dead. Then the protagonist says to avoid any future problems, no water leaks. The opponent is quite relentless. Lai says the driver also left a suicide note saying he didn't have any deaths to make up for, so he had to pay with his life. The protagonist then asks where the driver's family is. Lai says the driver divorced a few years ago and lived alone. The protagonist asks him to check anyway, and says that if someone paid for the murder, the bargaining chip that would make the driver willingly give up his life could only be a loved one. Lai says he'll arrange that immediately. At a Nanshan's house, Lai Xiu asks him to eat the snack she brought for him and tells him to eat it every day. She says his daughter still cares about this. Nanshan asks what's wrong now. She says Gigi has been chasing after that poor boy every day, and questions Nanshan what he has to say about it. Another opinion would be well received. And Jian arrives with Han Shaoqing and asks his mother why she's shouting early in the morning. Soon, Shaoqing asks her if Shiji hasn't come back yet. She says she'll be back soon. She claims they should eat first and says she'll call her later. Shaoqing tells Lai Xiu that if Shiji really doesn't like him, he's willing to give up. Lai Xiu says that's impossible. Jian tells Shaoqing that he, a young director, can still lose to a poor student who eats teen food. Shaoqing says it's just a family property. It's not worth mentioning. Soon the young blonde woman says to her parents and siblings that she's back. Everyone is left speechless as they see her and the protagonist. Then the protagonist introduces himself and says his name is Su-Xun. He is Gigi's boyfriend. He says he didn't bring any presents on his first visit, just bought some fruit as a token of appreciation. Then Jianian asks the protagonist what he is, a peasant boy from the countryside, and questions if he is worthy. He tells the protagonist to gather his trash and leave immediately. Calmly, the protagonist tells his girlfriend's father that they are at least one big family, and questions if this is how they raised their son. Humility was nowhere to be found here. Asking the protagonist to repeat what he just said, Jianian tells him to shut up, calling the protagonist a shameful bastard. Nanshan tells the protagonist that he always appreciates his knowledge of the times but questions why he did something so stupid today. He says the protagonist isn't good enough for Gigi and tells him to leave. Stunned upon hearing that, the protagonist asks to say just a few words. Interrupting the protagonist, Shaoqing introduces himself, saying his name is Han Shaoqing, and that the young director of Kangshan Iron and Steel Group will be the president of Kangshan Group in the future. Unintentionally, the protagonist drops his card on the floor. He then says there's $1 million on the card, asks him to take the money and get out. The protagonist then thinks that he really doesn't want to talk to him, and wonders if it's time to punch him in the face. Soon, Gigi tells Han Shaoqing that she usually keeps quiet and doesn't care about money. She says it's not worth mentioning how he is. She questions why he's so eager to reveal his identity today. Shaching says he wants to make someone realize that the protagonist is actually a frog, not always thinking of the white swan. Then the protagonist grabs his card and walks towards Shaching, who laughs and says that the protagonist knows what's most important. The protagonist then puts the card in Shaching's pocket and says that money is something the protagonist earns with the southwest of Shaching's father. He asks him not to throw the money on the ground like trash. I'm getting stunned here. Furious, Shaching tells the protagonist not to be a coward, that he's the director of a company with a market value of 30 billion, and asks the protagonist to show his identity immediately. He says they should let the father and aunt decide for themselves who is more worthy of Gigi. The protagonist tells Shaching that he's the president of Kinyan International. Before the protagonist can finish speaking, Shaching says he's just a failure. Then, realizing what the protagonist said, everyone there is surprised by who he is. Disbelieving, Shaching asks the protagonist if he's really the president of Kinyan International. Could it be a joke? Scratching his head, and the protagonist questions Shaching if it doesn't seem like he is. Shaching says the protagonist boasted so much. How could he say he's not the old president? He wonders how it's possible that the president of Kinyan International could take his turn as a bastard. He asks the protagonist if he thinks Shaching is stupid. On the news, the reporter says that after the unexpected death of the former president of Kinyan International, according to his will, yesterday, 19-year-old Suksan is succeeded as president. Back at Gigi's house, the protagonist says that it's reported that Kinyan International's market value is about 130 billion. Then Gigi's father tells the protagonist that so the newly appointed president of Kinyan International is him. Then the protagonist tells Director Han that they should cooperate well when they have the opportunity in the future. Nervous, Shaching says for sure. And suddenly, he remembers that he's in a hurry and decides to leave first. Then Janyan puts his arm around the protagonist's shoulder and says that, as he can see at first glance, the protagonist is a dragon and a phoenix. Then the protagonist says that Janyan is flattering him. Nanshin tells Janyan that just because a person has money doesn't make him your brother-in-law, and questions if he thinks Nanshin is dead. A very negative thought. Then Yu asks the protagonist to sit down and asks if he has eaten anything. The protagonist tells his father-in-law that he's here today for business. He says that the Kinyan group hopes to cooperate with their Taishan group. Nanshin says that must be a joke and asks who in the world doesn't know that he never negotiated with the Kinyan group. He says that if the protagonist is really a poor boy, he won't hate him. But if he's the president of Kinyan, then never come to his house again. Then Gigi tells her father that he can't do that. Then her father says there's no room for negotiation, and asks that the protagonist be a visitor leaving. Quickly, the protagonist says it doesn't matter. He also sent someone specially to investigate the complaint between Taishan and Kinyan. With some fruit on the plate, Yu questions her husband why he doesn't make a good business deal. Sweating profusely, Nanshin asks what he investigated. Then the protagonist says that according to the research, when he and Mr. Zhao were young. Interrupted halfway, the protagonist is cut off by Nanshin, who says they're going to talk about a list, right? Then he says there's no problem and asks the protagonist to go to his studio and sign now. Better not miss the chance. While hugging the protagonist, Nanshin says that at first glance, the protagonist is a dragon and a phoenix. Then the protagonist thanks him and says that the vice president's son just praised him with the same compliments. Then he asks Nanshin if he and Mr. Zhao really used to be rivals in love. Nanshin tells the protagonist to shut up and says that if his wife finds out about this, he will officially be dead. In his office, Chen wonders if the protagonist really signed the contract. Liu Jun responds to Chen, saying yes. Nanshin has to wait for the announcement from the Taishan Group's board of directors in 2 days. He asks Chen what they will do. Furious, Chen slams the glass on the table and says it makes no sense. Tarzan always considers them enemies, and he questions how he could agree to that kid's request. Liu Jun says that, as far as he knows, the protagonist met with Nanshin's daughter, and they were classmates. Furious, the protagonist questions why they didn't tell him such important information earlier. Liu Jun says he just found out about it. And he asks if the protagonist just wants to keep doing this. Chen says there's no need and claims that the protagonist is just a child. He asks if they think Chen will panic. He claims that he's figured out how to handle him. This time, it'll be different. The system shows the protagonist that there are still 4 days left until the deadline and asks him to please complete the task as soon as possible. The protagonist then claims that while the contract is done, the most important thing, however, is to investigate the truth. Delighted with the protagonist's idea, Mr. Lai thinks it's incredible. Then Lai says that the driver has a daughter who went to study abroad 3 years ago, and it was when he started driving trucks for this project. The protagonist then thinks that a truck driver really has the money to send his daughter abroad. It seems like someone bought his life. And the other side is a werewolf, available with a 3-year lead. He says that for a long time they couldn't find a funding source, But as the protagonist said, the opponent is ruthless, and they cannot afford to be unprotected against him. Then Mr. Lai says that he hired bodyguards to protect the protagonist from now on. Let's see if they mess with him now. After seeing the group of men approaching, the protagonist asks them to come in. Then all the men greet the protagonist. Mr. Lai tells him not to worry. He says that all of them are elite retired special forces with good skills and high loyalty. The protagonist then asks to give each one a job. The protagonist says he has a question for the security guard. He takes a graduation photo and asks the young man who the man he's pointing at is. Then the protagonist says that if he can be next to Chen Hua, his level must be high, right? The protagonist then asks why he didn't see him at the last meeting. Mr. Lai says that this person is named Tigo Jun, and he's not a member of the board of directors, but he is indeed a trusted consultant of Chen Hua. Then Lai says that it said the protagonist is the one who does many of the unseen things for Chen Hua. He could be called Chen Hua's most loyal dog. Lai then asks the protagonist if he wants to start with him, and he says he's afraid the protagonist is a piece of steel. The protagonist says he was just curious and that it was just a question. Let's be honest, right? In the hallway outside, Tigo Jun questions the receptionist for not even saying hello when he appears. She says he wasn't supposed to go there anymore. Then he asks if she would like to contact him privately, but wonders if the protagonist would answer her call. He then says he has an urgent matter to show and tell the employee. She then says that she has no obligation to help him. Then Jun pulls the secretary by the waist and asks her not to be so cold with him, and that without him she could be the leader's secretary as the secretary. He then says that whether Tigo Jun believes it or not, the chubby guy knows what to do. Then the employee says that Tigo should let her go and tries to escape from his grasp. He then says that she should definitely listen and tells her that her father is really desperate. He says if she doesn't want him to die, she should help him stay alive. Arriving at work, the protagonist stretches and says he's exhausted. Then the bodyguards bow to the protagonist, wishing him a great day and a good work. One of the bodyguards asks the protagonist where he's going and says he'll pick him up. The protagonist says that after work he's going home. Then one of the men who arrived there calls everyone to work. Noticing this, the protagonist realizes that everyone there is quite energetic. They ask to send the protagonist home to sleep. Apparently, they can't stand energetic people. As he's about to leave, the protagonist says goodbye to Liao Yu and says he's leaving early. She says goodbye to him, but then remembers that her car broke down and asks for a ride from the protagonist. She says if he finds it problematic, she can take a taxi. The protagonist says it's fine and that he'll help her. Upon arriving at her house, Liao Yu thanks the protagonist for taking her home. Then the protagonist asks Liao Yu to follow him while he goes toward his house. Not understanding why, Liao Yu just follows the protagonist. But soon he says that he sent her back and she doesn't even let the protagonist drink water in peace. Liao Yu then apologizes to the protagonist. Back there, the bodyguards are talking amongst themselves and one of them asks if they want to go upstairs too. Then the other security guard lectures him and asks if he has a brain. He says it looks like the protagonist is going to drink that water all night. So much water. After arriving at his house, Liao Yu apologizes to the protagonist for the house being a bit messy. The protagonist says it's fine. He used to live in a dormitory that was even messier than that one. While heading to the couch, the protagonist asks Liao Yu if her energy is focused on her work. Then Leo picks up her bra that was in the protagonist's hands and asks him not to move. The protagonist asks for some water. While going to get the water, Liao Yu thinks she found an opportunity to spend some time alone with him before giving him the medicine. Tigo Jun tells the journalist that the protagonist will lose consciousness soon, and then she'll take a few more photos of them together. While staying silent, Tigo Jun places a kind of pill in the water. While looking at some photos, the protagonist is surprised when a waitress brings him the water he requested. The protagonist then asks the waitress where she is now. The waitress says maybe at home. After taking his glass of water, the protagonist asks the waitress what her relationship with Liao Jun is. This completely rattles the waitress. Poor girl. Nervous, she responds to the protagonist, saying that it has nothing to do with her, and that by coincidence, they just have the same last name. The protagonist says it's fine. Seeing that the protagonist is about to drink the water contaminated by Tigo, the protagonist thanks the young woman for her hospitality and says she should rest early. He also says that he's leaving. Before leaving, someone knocks on the door and tells the protagonist that they have something to ask him. Seeing that the medicine hasn't taken effect on the protagonist yet, the waitress knows she can't let him go. Seeing that the waitress is a little nervous, the protagonist says that she seems like she won't let him go. While stammering, the protagonist tells her that it's okay to ask, just ask. Outside, that security guard receives a message from Sue and says he has 5 minutes to cut the network signal for the whole building. He then calls all the other men to work. He tells Bug to take 2 people to turn off the network cables in the building. Stone, take down all the signaling towers around the community quickly. Back at the company, the protagonist asks the waitress what she wanted to ask. Then she asks the protagonist if he's feeling sleepy. Realizing the whole situation, the protagonist knows this means someone tricked her into giving him an aphrodisiac, but she thought it was just a sleeping pill. He also knows that if she's in the dark too, there must be other members in the audience. An important fact to pay attention to. Again, the waitress asks the protagonist if he's okay and wonders if the Tez is that bad and if there's too much medicine in the water. Then the waitress says she sees that the protagonist's face doesn't look very well. Sitting on the couch with his hand on his face, the protagonist seems unwell. Watching everything through the cameras, the men say a great show is about to begin. Then Chen says that tonight they will find out how brave the protagonist really is. After touching his face, the waitress says the protagonist's forehead is very hot and says she will take him to the hospital. The protagonist thinks how stupid that woman is. Looking to the side, the protagonist notices there's no signal at all. In another room, one of the men says the beautiful image is coming. Then another one says to cut the network signal as quickly as possible. Completely opposite actions. Furious, the protagonist throws his waitress on the couch, calling her stupid, and says she doesn't even know she's been tricked. This leaves the waitress completely confused. Then he asks her to get him some ice and more better. Stuck on that couch, the waitress asks if she's the one being counted. Then one of the security guards knocks on the door, calling for the protagonist. The waitress says he's in the bathroom taking a shower. He then says Mr. Su revealed himself so quickly. Whining, the waitress tells the man to keep his sleazy, cheap smile to himself. After coming out of the bathroom, the man tells the protagonist that he's still young, and that he has to take it easy. Claiming that young people don't know, being interrupted by the protagonist, he tells the man to shut up and go work. The man looks confused, and then the protagonist says there must be hidden cameras in the room and asks him to find them. The security guard then goes to the waitress and says she's trying to secretly take photos of the protagonist. She says she doesn't know about any hidden cameras in the room. The protagonist then tells her not to talk nonsense and asks his security guard to hurry up and find them. What if something happened? While the security guard searches for the hidden camera, the protagonist asks the waitress what kind of medicine Liu Jun told her it was. She answers saying it was a sleeping pill. Then he says that's stupid and asks the waitress if she thinks she can finish him off by taking a picture of him sleeping. He claims they must have stronger evidence. The protagonist tells the waitress that what Liu Jun gave her was an aphrodisiac, and she's already been taken as his sacrificial lamb, and she knows this. Claiming that this is impossible, the protagonist's security guard says he found the hidden camera, and claims it was well hidden. Stammering, the waitress says she can't believe this is true. He asks his security guard to keep looking and claims there must be a secret room nearby. He also says that her biological father pushed his own daughter into the fire, and it was really uncomfortable. Scared, the waitress asks the protagonist how he knew all of this. The protagonist says he was just guessing. But it seems he guessed correctly. Nice move. Sitting next to the protagonist, the waitress says that Liu Jun is indeed her father, and says that 15 years ago he left home because of a woman, leaving her and her very sick mother to defend themselves alone. And 3 years ago she left alone when she was desperate, and it happened to him. At that time he was already a small leader of the Kinyan group, and he made it possible for her to join Kinyan so that she wouldn't starve to death on the street. Although she hated him, Then the protagonist interrupts the waitress by snapping his fingers, claiming that she can't refuse his request either. Can she? Leaving the waitress completely speechless. Then the protagonist's security guard says he found 3 cameras in the room and 1 in the bathroom. He says they're trying to kill the protagonist and that his name is very hated by them. After showing all those cameras found to the waitress, the protagonist asks her if, seeing this, she still has hope in her father. Desperate, the waitress puts her hands on her head and says she can't believe he would do that and claims he must have been kept in the dark. The protagonist's security guard says her brain has been squeezed by the door. He's interrupted by the protagonist, who says that if he wants to take down Chen Hua, he needs to find an approach in the army, and he needs her help. And if she doesn't want to help, he won't force her to do it. This is called empathy. Then the protagonist calls his security guard to leave. He asks the protagonist if that's all for today, and asks, if not, why doesn't the protagonist sell Liu Jun? Then they leave, leaving the waitress in tears. That night, the waitress remembers her past with Liu Jun. She remembers the time she was humiliated and left aside by him. Back then, Liu Jun pushed the young girl into the rain and told her she had no skills and still had the nerve to apply for a job. In her room, Liu Yup thinks that, anyway, they are all her, the last relative in this world, and she thinks she'd like to give her father another chance. About to knock on the door to talk to her father, Liu Yup overhears the conversation of those men. One says to Daejun that he knows many ruthless people, like he is the most impassive person he's ever met. That is 3 years earlier than expected, ambushing his own daughter as a chess piece. Another man, who heard that he has a bad relationship with his daughter, asks how he made her treat him obediently. Laughing, Liu Jun says it's simple. Say hello to all the companies she wants to apply to, then don't hire her. And finally climb on stage where she crashes and she'll hear him about everything. Then one of the men says, as expected of Mr. Chen's right-hand man, and says the plan is very well organized. Then he asks Liao if he can see the video tomorrow. He says no problem, and he'll send someone to his house to pick it up and then send it to him for him to enjoy. Liao Yup stays behind the door listening to all of this and can only cry. Hey guys, are you enjoying it so far? Drop a like to support and comment what you think. If there's any story you want to see here on the channel, just comment the name. I'm always watching to bring good stories. In the car, the protagonist's security guard says that girl, Liao Yup, obviously betrayed him and questions why he doesn't deal with her. Then the protagonist says that since ancient times, the hardest thing to give up is family love, and says he's just her boss, questioning why she would betray her father. Then he says, however, his secretary is from Manhwa, which is really unexpected. Then the security guard tells the protagonist not to worry, because he and all his brothers are absolutely loyal to him. The protagonist says he is very satisfied with his performance and his team, and tells him not to use people with suspicion, as he treats him as a confidant and he trusts him 100%. Admiring the protagonist's words, his security guard keeps thinking about how, at such a young age, he's in charge of billions and empires. He can still treat his subordinates with absolute trust. His security guard knows that strong enemies are waiting for the protagonist, but he's not even a little timid and always keeps a vigorous work attitude. Looking at his slightly furrowed brows, the security guard deduces that the protagonist must be dealing with some tough work. Then he thinks, how can there be such a charming man in the world? Looking at a broadcast of a girl, the protagonist wonders who could be his anchor now. Then the protagonist arrives home and tells his security guard to pick him up tomorrow morning. He thanks him for his hard work. As he's about to enter his residence, the protagonist thinks that there are still 2 days left for the task to end, and he can't panic in such a short time. Anxiety really is a sadness. When the gate is about to open, the protagonist is surprised by Liao Yup arriving there. She immediately asks the protagonist if she can hold him for a few minutes to talk about what happened earlier. Without hesitation, the protagonist asks her to come in. Once inside, Liao Yup says that her father is a beast. For so many years, she was calculated by him. She says this kind of scum doesn't deserve to live in the world, and if he wants to destroy them, then she will retaliate. She says that as long as she can take revenge, she will do whatever the protagonist wants her to do. Even if she has to sacrifice her own body, she will. Trying to calm the young woman down, the protagonist tells her to remember to follow him, and that she won't make any sacrifices. Whatever she wants for revenge, he can help her achieve. Then Liao Yup is left speechless and can only cry. In another scene, Liao Jun is on the phone telling someone that when the protagonist goes down, he goes up. He says not to scare the snakes. Then he asks the person to go into the room and find all the cameras. Soon after, Liao Yup appears holding the cameras and asks her father if these are the cameras he's looking for. This leaves him totally shocked. She says that even his own daughter was betraying him, claiming that he buried a pinhole camera without telling her, and she questions how this adds up. I don't know either. Speechless, Liao Jun says he's sorry for her. He says it was Mr. Chen he insisted on having it falsified, and he says it was he who let the medicine play out and sent someone to bury the camera. When he realized it was too late, he tells Liao Yup that he will never allow his daughter to be treated unjustly, and he claims that once it's done, she will definitely be put on the board. Then Liao Jun asks if it was Suzun who found those cameras. Liao Yup responds to her father, saying that the protagonist simply entered and said he was tired. Then Jun says it's something important and questions whether the protagonist interfered with her. Soon after, he asks Yup to hurry and questions if she wants to kill him. Inside his house, possibly his wife asks Liao Jun who that young woman is. He says she's a colleague and that there's official business, claiming he'll leave soon. Then Liao Yup tells her father to go to his studio and tell them that he doesn't want to see that woman. After opening his office, Liao Yup's father asks how the protagonist is doing. Soon after, Liao Yup remembers that the protagonist had told her that the key to breaking the game is in Tivo Jun's computer. In his office while getting the camera, Liao Jun asks where the memory card is. Liao Yup says she would even give him the video for free. What about everything he did to her? Then she demands 8 million from her father, not even a penny less, or he won't get anything. Either he gives it or she'll break him. Then Liao Yup says that she's not in a hurry and the protagonist isn't waiting for her right now. Knowing that his daughter has gained control, he knows that if he doesn't meet her demands, how will he bring down the protagonist? Thinking about the amount requested, he doesn't mind. He just doesn't want that piece of meat to be cut off from him. Then he grabs his phone and tells Leo Yup to wait for a moment. He's going to ask his leader. Then Yup says she'll give him only 10 minutes as her patience is limited. Outside on the phone, Leo Jun asks where Mr. Chen is and asks for him to be put on the phone immediately. While Leo Jun is out there trying to contact Chen, Liao Yup plugs a USB drive into his computer. She then establishes a shared connection with the protagonist and a colleague. Soon after, the protagonist tells his colleague to find what he's looking for, and he will give him 8 million. Quite a reward, by the way. The three men who are watching the protagonist work with his colleague question if they were informed to bring the best computer experts overnight to do exactly that. That one of the men says that 8 million is a lot of money, and that the protagonist is truly willing to spend the money. Trying to make him hurry, Liao Yup starts to get nervous. Then the young man helping the protagonist says that he found the hidden folder with a password, but it's not a big problem. Soon, the protagonist tells him to hurry. Back in the room, Leo Jun says that Chen will transfer the money to him first, but he will only give the money to her after she confirms the video. After opening the door, Leo asks Yup what she's doing. Yup claims that even the photos of her mother and herself refuse to be displayed, which is really cruel. Leo Jun tells Yup to stop talking nonsense, and says he already has the money, but he wants to see the video first. Soon, Yup says she wants to see the money first. Then Leo Jun goes silent without giving an answer. Furious, Yup asks Leo Jun if he has made up his mind and says that her patience is running out. I'd say this is the famous short fuse. Leo Jun tells Yup not to play games, otherwise both of them will die miserably. After receiving the money, Leo Jun asks Yup if everything's okay now. Then she says that after all, he is her father, and this kind of scene is impossible for him to see. She asks her father if he just wants to play with her, and questions if she has any connection between NZ and Suzun. Furious, Leo Jun grabs Yup's arm and asks her if she thinks he's a fool. He demands the video or else she won't go anywhere. Nervous, Yup asks her father to let her go. At the company, Chen tells his employee that after the notice, there will be an internal board meeting in 10 minutes. Agreeing with Chen, the employee goes to the protagonist's room. Once there, she informs him that the protagonist will attend the internal board meeting. Soon, he thinks the decisive moment has arrived. Back in Leo Jun's office, he throws Leo Yup to the ground and says that he doesn't have time to play with her. He says he's giving her the last chance. Then he asks again where the video is. Soon, Chen calls Leo Jun and he says that he still doesn't have the material. Then Yup says that the video was sent to Anjiji. Soon, Leo Jun is surprised to realize that Anjiji had gone to the company. In the meeting room, Anjiji's brother says that Kinyan is underestimating our Taishan, right? And questions how dare he put a cuckold on his sister. Soon, the protagonist gives no response to him, making Anjiji's brother ask him to say something since he's such an arrogant boy. Not something to doubt too much. Then he asks the protagonist if he still wants to pursue his sister with such a character, and tells him to go back and eat his crap. Soon Mr. N says that this feeling is beautiful. So many days of depression, finally exhausted. Then the protagonist responds to Mr. N asking him to calm down, and wonders if they can talk about that in his office. Thinking about how that guy is addicted to acting like everything is so cool, he doesn't believe there's no personal grind in him. Impossible for someone to be like this. Chen enters the conversation claiming that as president of the board, the protagonist had suffered an unjust injustice, and they will definitely make it right. The man next to Chen tells the protagonist to make sure to speak clearly. Soon, Anjiji's brother asks the protagonist if he doesn't want to do justice, right, and asks everyone to come in. Soon, a huge team of journalists enters the room, filming and recording everything. After entering the room claiming they are from the TV station, they ask the protagonist if he has something to say about the matter, and ask him to tell them some things. Soon, the security tries to stop them from entering, claiming that this is a conference room. Soon, Chen asks the security not to stop the TV stations from entering the room and filming everything, and says that the media presence can highlight the strength of the Kinyan group, and says that the body has no fear of the shadow. The protagonist says that Chen always has to be so ruthless. Soon, Chen says that he's trying to prove his innocence. Soon, Anjiji grabs his laptop and says that all the truth is there. He asks everyone to see it with their own eyes. Soon, Chen says that if that girl fights with him, he will make her lose all her reputation. Then Leo Jun enters the room and encounters all those people. He then goes to Xiao Changbing and says that this old thing is really in the way. He claims that Jake has time to kill him in the next 2 days, and says the driver is ready and will be ready to do it tomorrow. After noticing what Anjiji is displaying on the computer, Chen asks her to shut it down immediately and tells the journalists not to film that. What if it leaks? Seeing that video, everyone realizes it's the murder scene, and they realize that Mr. Zhou's death wasn't an accident, but a deliberate murder. Furious, Chen asks if he's creating a bucket of rice, and asks if they still want to work. If so, in 3 seconds, break the phone and the camera for him. Soon it's requested to remove those security guards and not interfere with the reporter's interviews. Soon the protagonist's men remove those security guards and say that they are nothing but a bunch of shrimp and crabs, asking them not to disturb the interview. Soon the interviewers ask the protagonist, what does he have to say about this so far? Nervous, Chen asks Liu Jun how he dared install a pinhole camera in his office. He says he just wanted to keep a trump card for self-protection, but ended up being tricked by Liao Yu. Poor guy got screwed here. Soon the police arrive at the scene and say that now they suspect that the two are involved in the murder of Zhao Chengming. Soon the police handcuff Chen and Liu Jun and tell them to follow them. Relieved to finally solve the mystery of Zhao's death, Anjiji is happy with his great performance. Then the protagonist says that Anjiji is just a tool man and he is the soul that drives the development of this drama. Soon the system congratulates the protagonist and says that the task was successfully completed. It asks the protagonist to please say the command extract identity to obtain this week's identity. After speaking the command, the system shows that the protagonist obtained the identity of the King of Assassins. It shows that in addition to being the president of Kingyun International, the protagonist secretly has an unknown identity, the King of Assassins, nicknamed God. His footprints have spread all over the world. His reputation has been sung by thousands, warlords, political treatment heads, etc. No matter who it is, as long as they are struck by the protagonist, they will be spared. Later, the protagonist chooses to retire and enjoy a normal life, but now his enemy has found his trail and his peaceful life is about to be interrupted. Now the mess is about to start. The system shows the protagonist's identity skills, such as stealth, disguise, bad medicine, proficiency with firearms, proficient in hand-to-hand combat, and his keen senses. Identity quests. Solve the problems that your identity will bring and survive. This quest is not time-limited. Note: after the identity is extracted, it will be permanently valid, and completing the task will permanently grant an identity skill. In the protagonist's room, Mr. Lai tells him that the police confirm the video is real. Therefore, the murder of Chen Hua and Liu Jun will definitely not escape at least a life sentence. Soon, the protagonist says that the punishment they deserved is death. Soon, Mr. Li asks the protagonist what he said. That the protagonist says he wants them to die, there can be no variables, and asks Mr. Lai to arrange it. With no choice, Lai agrees with the protagonist and immediately leaves his room. Soon he thinks that in the face of a mortal enemy in business, the protagonist seizes the opportunity to bring the opponent to death. Although the protagonist is young, he truly does not lose to anyone. That's not untrue. In his room, while looking at the pen, the protagonist grabs several white cards and throws them away along with the pen. Upon entering his room, the protagonist's security guard notices that he is the King of Assassins and soon asks the protagonist if he wants to fight with his security guard. Soon, the protagonist asks his security guard to attack him with all his strength. The security guard says that he's heard about the protagonist's rich people's game. He then charges at the protagonist and throws a punch in his direction. Although the punch lands, it has no effect, and the security guard is thrown backward like a weak doll. Falling back, the security guard says that it hurts like hell. He claims that the protagonist really has a divine protector. He says his hand is destroyed. Soon, the protagonist says he will look for someone else to practice with, so he heads to a live boxing fight center. When he arrives, the protagonist stands in the crowd watching the fight currently taking place. Soon, the protagonist claims that it's very easy to defeat them. Then a bald man next to the protagonist asks what he said. He says he taught his students and asks how the protagonist dares to say it's easy to beat them. Arrogance, perhaps. The man then asks the protagonist if he's there to throw in the towel. Soon, the protagonist says that the man misunderstood everything. He says he's there to throw punches too. And honestly, it's easy to defeat that man's students. Furious, the man asks the protagonist if he's tired of living and dares to step up and compete with him. The protagonist accepts the challenge and says he'll bother him. In the ring, the man asks the protagonist how he dares to fart in his shop with his tiny arms and legs. He says if he doesn't beat the protagonist today, he'll shut down the place immediately. The protagonist mocks the man, saying it's just sparring, nothing big. Han arrives at the boxing gym with some men. One of them asks Han if he's satisfied with the construction of the restaurant. He says he'll do it, but it's not worth the money he invested in it. Then he notices that the protagonist is there too. More specifically, on the ring. About to fight, the protagonist says he's there today to test his martial arts and thanks the man. Before the fight starts, another man approaches the ring and whispers something in the ear of the man the protagonist is about to fight. Confused, the protagonist asks what's going on. Soon, the man says that nothing is happening. trying to cover up. In his ear, the second man says that Mr. Han sent word to the bald man to deal with the protagonist and that Han will give him $1 million for the job. The bald man says he's fine with it and that it will just be a sparring session. From the audience, Han wonders if the protagonist is really able to stay there. The man accompanying Han says that this is the one who returned from abroad with a lot of money, known as the Monster of the Zumbito River, specialized in black market competition among the countless unjust souls. He tells Han to just watch the show, and claims that in less than 10 seconds, the protagonist will definitely have a broken leg. After the fight starts, the bald man throws a punch at the protagonist, who quickly dodges, leaving everyone there stunned by it. Surprised, Han asks if the man's people are not eating enough. He claims that was a hell of a punch. Powerful boss. The bald man tells Han to calm down and says it must be just a blind cat that found a dead mouse. Suvin yells at the bald man to give him a good fight or he'll sell his behind. In the ring, the protagonist says he really wants to know how strong he truly is, and asks the man to use all his power. Soon that man realizes the protagonist isn't as weak as he seems, he's just pretending. But he also thinks the protagonist's biggest mistake is that he shouldn't have pretended in front of him. Furious, that man says to the protagonist that since he's begging for death, he'll be the one to grant it. He drives the audience wild with his fury. The man then tells Han that the punch was just a warm-up and now the boy is going to die. Han says that's going to be the price for the protagonist stealing his woman. In the ring, furious, that man throws several punches at the protagonist, but none of them land. Provoking that man, the protagonist asks if he could be faster, if that's his limit, and questions whether he really can't land a punch. The man then asks the protagonist if he's a rat and admits that his dodging is very good. He asks the protagonist if he dares to punch him. He's challenging him a bit too much. Without hesitation, the protagonist throws a punch in his direction, which immediately breaks the man's arm in half. The man falls to the mat and screams in pain. Everyone there is shocked by the brutality against the bald man. In the ring, even the protagonist is amazed by his own strength. The man claims it hurts a lot and asks the protagonist to call an ambulance for him. Seeing that his plan has failed once again, Han wants to leave immediately. But soon, the protagonist spots him and greets him from the ring. Han is completely shocked when he realizes the protagonist has spotted him. Angry, Han says it's a coincidence that the protagonist is there too. He questions what the protagonist is doing there. As the protagonist approaches Han, his security guards ask the protagonist to keep his distance. Without hesitation, the protagonist knocks the heads of the two security guards together and says that Han just asked someone to send a message to that guy. He claims he heard every word. Terrified, Han says it was all a misunderstanding. The protagonist puts his arm over Han's shoulder and says that this is the first and the fastest. He says he really doesn't want to negotiate with Han, but if Han tries any more dirty tricks, the protagonist won't hesitate to kill him. He tells Han to remember what he said and not to do anything stupid again. With no other choice, Han says he understands perfectly. Pure and spontaneous pressure. Soon, the protagonist says goodbye to everyone. Han tells him to be careful when leaving and take care. The spectators then ask who the man is who easily took down Han's two bodyguards and dared to touch his face. They say the craziest part is that Han didn't dare to make a single move. They ask if Han isn't known as the craziest young master. Terrified, Han says he can't pretend this time. He says the protagonist is just a guy with no skills. During the day, they feel good about themselves, but when things go wrong, they become weak. A strange reaction. Outside, the protagonist calls Anjiji and asks if she has time for them to have a meal together. Ignoring his question, Anjiji says that if the protagonist keeps causing trouble like this, he'll be expelled sooner or later. The protagonist then says he spoke to the director and donated $3 million to the school next week to create an education fund, and they can give approval for his final exams. From the top of the building, while watching the protagonist, the blonde woman says it's hard to believe that the king of assassins is so young. The man then says that it doesn't matter how young or old he is, he's about to become a corpse anyway. Looking through binoculars at the protagonist, the woman says it took so much effort to finally find him. The protagonist then looks directly at the woman as if he knows that she and the man are watching him. The woman is startled by the protagonist's gaze, which makes the man ask what's going on. The woman then says it seems the protagonist has discovered their position. Questioning how, the man wonders how they were detected from such a distance. He grabs the binoculars to look at the protagonist, but finds the area completely clear, somewhat unexpected. Hiding in an alley, the protagonist thinks about that killer aura and wonders if it could have been Han Xiaochang who sent them. But then he says Han couldn't have been that fast, and suggests that it seems the ancient enemies of God have arrived at the door. Heading home, the protagonist's bodyguard says that, as per the protagonist's instructions, 30 more people were added to the security. He also informs that infrared alarms have been set up around the village to immediately detect anyone who approaches. The protagonist says it was great hard work and tells his bodyguard to go rest now. Outside, from a distance, the woman and the man on the rooftop analyze the protagonist's house. The man then says the security has been reinforced, so it seems the protagonist got the message. The woman says she can't believe they use such a low method to protect themselves. She wonders why they chose to retire and claims that God really isn't good enough. Inside the house, while looking at some photos, the protagonist thinks that with this method, they might be able to paralyze them and then deliberately show a break, draw them into the attack, and then trap them. The question is, when should they choose the time to lure the snake out of the hole? It's going to have to be precise here. Soon, an unknown number calls the protagonist's phone. Upon answering, someone asks the protagonist how he is. The protagonist thinks the voice is from God's previous agent, Tony. He wonders why Tony contacted him so suddenly and questions if God didn't retire. The protagonist then asks Tony how he dares to call him directly on his phone. He says they can't meet or talk directly in this business and questions if Tony has forgotten the rules. Tony then says that to avoid misunderstanding, he doesn't want to disobey the protagonist's orders, but he says there's a big request that will be easy for the protagonist. The protagonist asks Tony to tell him about it. Tony says the target is in the Xia country, which shouldn't be far from the protagonist. But he says the thing is that this time the buyer is generous, $3.5 million for a single request. The protagonist then asks Tony what the status of the target is to be worth such a high price. Tony says that as president of a listed company, it should be very easy for the protagonist. He adds that he's sending the target's information to the protagonist's email. The protagonist then asks again about the status of the target worth such a high price. Tony then hangs up on the protagonist. After receiving the information in the email, the protagonist opens it to see who it is. But when he opens the information, he finds the details are about himself. This leaves him confused about what's going on. He's even more confused now. On the beach, while relaxing, Tony receives a call from the protagonist. Upon answering, Tony asks the protagonist if he's interested. The protagonist asks Tony the employer's name. Startled, Tony says the information about the employer is he's interrupted by the protagonist, who says that whatever he wants, he will get, and questions Tony if he's naive enough to think he can't handle this. Seeing that the protagonist is speaking seriously, Tony says it's just a joke. Of course, he'll comply with the protagonist's request. He then says the employer is also a native of Xia, named Han Xiaoqing, a young master of a business group. Furious, the protagonist says that Han Xiaoqing really wants to die. Tony then says that this has nothing to do with him and that the protagonist should believe him. Just then, Anjiji knocks on the protagonist's door and asks what he's doing when answering the phone, just to satisfy her curiosity. Surprised, the protagonist asks Anjiji what she's doing there. Furious, she asks him if he forgot, and she questions him about who told them they should have lunch together to return the favor. The protagonist apologizes to Anjiji and says he completely forgot. She says the protagonist knows how hard it was for her to reserve that restaurant, and claims how could the protagonist compensate her if he loses her. With no choice, Anjiji grabs the protagonist by the arm and takes him away. Outside, Anjiji wonders why there are so many people around the protagonist's house. Soon, the protagonist's bodyguard asks if he's leaving. The protagonist says yes and asks him to take some people to follow him. They then head to the restaurant. In the car, the man tells the young woman that the protagonist has left and asks if they should follow him. She replies saying there's no need, and that today is not the time to make any moves. And judging by his reaction during the day, the protagonist has already found him. She also says it's not too late to wait for the reinforcements to arrive. It's never too late. Inside the car, Anjiji says to the protagonist how he sees it. She said they wouldn't succeed, and claims that the hotel clearly states that if you arrive half an hour late, they can't reserve another place. And if the protagonist wants to make another reservation, it will be a month later. Then the protagonist calls the Imperial Hotel and says it's not about expanding business. He's only going to have a meal tomorrow and asks them to make arrangements. Anjiji then asks the protagonist what he's talking about. He says he's securing the hotel so they can spend tomorrow there. Then they head to Anjiji's house. Soon, she tells the protagonist to feel at home and says she'll prepare a bowl of noodles for him to eat. He then asks her if she's home alone. Anjiji says her brother is abroad and her parents are going to a meeting. She then tells him the lights are behind the couch and asks him to turn them on for her. Soon, the protagonist hugs Anjiji from behind, making her turn around and kiss him unexpectedly, completely catching her off guard. This leaves Anjiji utterly embarrassed. Then the protagonist begins to unbutton her dress, causing Anjiji to stammer, telling him not to do that. The protagonist then lays Anjiji on the couch, making her say she's not ready for this. The protagonist asks her not to get nervous, saying he will be very gentle. While kissing his girlfriend, someone turns on the living room lights. Then her parents walk in and witness the scene. A rather embarrassing moment. Embarrassed, Anjiji gets up from the couch, asking if they haven't gone to their meeting yet. Her father says the meeting was temporarily cancelled. Luckily, it was cancelled. Otherwise, her cabbage house would have been ruined by the unknown pig. Anjiji says it's not like that. The protagonist then tells her parents that, in fact, they misunderstood. He says they were just tropicalizing while searching for a light switch. Disguising the situation, the protagonist says that's where the switch is, and next time, he'll know where to turn on the light. He then zips up his pants in front of Anjiji's father. Furious, her father says that the protagonist's zipper is open, and asks the protagonist if he thinks he's some kind of idiot. Mocking, the protagonist says that unfortunately, the quality of the pants isn't good. He then says he has some things to do and wishes her parents good night, immediately leaving her house. He quickly got rid of that embarrassing moment. Outside, the protagonist's bodyguard asks how he finished so quickly. He tells his bodyguard to go back and leave him alone. Then the protagonist gets in the car, and they immediately leave the area. Inside the car, the protagonist claims that he got rid of Chu-Hu and all of them, and those assassins didn't show up. He says it looks like he can't expect to vent his anger on them today, but then he claims it's okay because he has a great punching bag. Arriving at Han's apartment, the protagonist asks if Han Xiaocheng lives there. One of Han's bodyguards immediately says that it's none of the protagonist's business and tells him to get lost. The protagonist ends that bodyguard with just one punch. The protagonist then says that all that power is overwhelming and that next time it's better for the bodyguard to hold back. The second bodyguard then points a gun at the protagonist and says that he's looking for death. The protagonist places his hand on the bodyguard's gun, rendering it useless. The bodyguard then asks what's going on and why his gun isn't responding. The protagonist says the barrel of the gun is misaligned and questions why the bodyguard is still trying to shoot. He then tells the bodyguard he can leave his job. The protagonist gives a blow to the bodyguard's neck, making him pass out instantly. He took a clean hit. Inside the room, Han complains about the noise outside. He says that if the two bodyguards keep making noise, he'll kill them, whether they believe it or not. The protagonist then enters Ham's room and says, "Hello." Startled to see the protagonist, Ham asks what he wants doing in his apartment. The protagonist points to the girls on Han's bed and says that those are personal deals and people with no connections to them should leave immediately. As the two young women walk past him, the protagonist says that Han is really excited, a dragon playing with two phoenixes. Han then tells the protagonist that if he's interested, you will personally select some of the best and send them to his house. He apologizes to the protagonist for what happened earlier and asks him to let him go. Sitting calmly, the protagonist says he's not there for today's events. Soon, some of Han's henchmen arrive to protect him and tell the protagonist not to be afraid. Laughing in the protagonist's face, Han calls him a bastard and says, "How can he be so crazy?" A bit aggressive, don't you think? Calmly, the protagonist says that it was incredible. He really ambushed the team in advance. Han then questions the protagonist, asking how he made Han look bad in public. He asks how that debt cannot be paid, and says that the protagonist just gathered people in the afternoon and went to relax at night. Then he claims that this is a gift. Mocking Han, the protagonist says he's still happy Han did that, but intimidating him, a weak chicken, really has no sense of achievement. Furious that the protagonist is still talking, Han orders his henchmen to beat him until he can't laugh anymore. In a failed attempt to hurt the protagonist, all of those henchmen are easily defeated by him. Disappointed, Han says that they are all a bunch of losers and that they shouldn't let the protagonist walk around freely. After taking down all the henchmen, the protagonist lifts Han by the neck and asks him what he said. Realizing that the protagonist took out his henchmen in an instant, Han asks what kind of monster the protagonist is. After letting Han go, the protagonist claims that Han has no more cards to play, right? Terrified but with a spike of courage, Han tells the protagonist that if he really has the guts, he should kill him. Or else, Han himself will finish him off. This guy is determined. Then Han says that even though the protagonist may be good in that place, he questions whether the protagonist is good enough to protect Anjiji 24 hours a day, and says that he could have taken her away with a phone call and hundreds of brothers under his command would have taken turns. Han is interrupted by the protagonist, who slaps him across the face. Surprised, Han asks the protagonist how he dares to hit him. The protagonist then says that if Han dares to touch Anjiji, he has 100 ways to make his life worse than death. Still facing the protagonist, Han says that they will see who's afraid of whom. He claims that the protagonist is just a company president, and with that, he thinks he's a god. Then the protagonist lays his cards on the table and says that the biggest mistake Han ever made in his life was paying $3.5 million for the protagonist's life. Shocked, Han asks the protagonist how he knows about that. He says he has the best intermediary, and claims that only he and God know. He then asks how the protagonist knows about it again. The protagonist moves close to Han's ear and says that it's because he is God. That's why he knows. He then drags Han out of his room. A bit strange, but okay. Outside, the protagonist throws Han against a glass door, shattering it completely. Then he claims that Han has a backhand behind him. Han asks the protagonist if he's going to send someone to shoot him. Trying to call the police, Han is grabbed by his hair and lifted high, even begging for his mother. The protagonist then tells Han that it doesn't seem like he set all of this up. Then several shots are fired at Han's room. The protagonist spots the assassin who followed him during the day. He points out that the assassin is on the roof across the street. Firing several shots, the man questions whether the protagonist wants to go and fight him. He then changes his aim to the exit. The moment the protagonist leaves, he's going to make his head explode. After a few seconds, the man realizes that the protagonist hasn't left. He asks if the protagonist has already gone. Caught by surprise, the man is struck in his left shoulder by a chopstick, which sticks to his shoulder. Wondering if it's really a chopstick, the protagonist appears and asks him to let him show how to properly use one. Learning is important, no matter what it is. The man then throws a smoke grenade at his feet, thinking that the protagonist can shoot chopsticks like bullets and hit the target with force over a 250-meter range, as expected of God. The protagonist then says that the man wants to run because he can't defeat him, calling him a thief. Taking advantage of the smoke screen, the man exits from the side of the building, claiming that the protagonist is a very strong opponent, so much so that he can't fight or leave quickly. He wonders how the protagonist can hurt him with a simple chopstick, wondering who the hell that guy is. As he touches the ground, the man is surprised by the protagonist, who is waiting for him down below. The protagonist then lands a kick on the man and asks why he's in such a hurry to leave. He invites the man to play a game together. Lying on the ground, the man draws his weapon and says he'll treat the protagonist like peanuts. He then fires at the protagonist, who quickly disappears from his sight. He's fast, that guy. After dodging the shots, the protagonist says that the man's response is very fast. But unfortunately, it's still too slow compared to him. The protagonist then lands another kick on the man while he's on the ground. In great pain, the man wonders how strong the protagonist is. The protagonist lifts the man by his shirt and asks who sent him. Ignoring the protagonist's question, the man says that, as expected from the background of the King of Assassins, he's really different. The protagonist asks, the previous generation? Or do you mean that he's the current King of Assassins? The protagonist then hangs the man from the top of the building and says that he's not interested in nonsense. He tells the man to give him an answer in 10 seconds, otherwise he won't have the chance to speak again. That man tells the protagonist not to rush, that his employer's name is... Changing the subject, the man grabs his knife and tries to stab the protagonist, telling him to go to hell. The protagonist then simply lets go of the man from such a height. In his last words, the man says that it takes effort. The protagonist replies that he will find out for himself, and so it was. As several security cars pass by below, the man ends up falling onto the roof of one of them. Without hesitation, the security guards begin shooting upwards towards the building. That blonde woman tells the men to go up the building and not let the protagonist get away. The man gets down from the car roof with the help of the blonde woman, who asks how his injuries are, whether they're serious or not. He says he has some broken bones, but it's not a big deal. Up above, one of the security guards shouts that the protagonist is gone. Angry, the blonde woman claims that she let the protagonist escape. One of the men there then tells her to leave the area as the police will arrive soon. Everyone then gets into the car and leaves immediately. Injured, the man says that the protagonist is a very scary opponent, and she should be careful when facing him. The blonde woman then tells him to go back and explain it all to the boss himself. It's quickly shown that the protagonist is hiding under one of their cars. Upon arriving at the boss's house, everyone claims they are back. Furious, the man says that they are all a bunch of idiots. He claims that he gave them so much money, and they didn't even hurt a hair on God's head. The injured man says that he was very confident and thought he could handle it alone. He then apologizes to his leader. He believed too much. He then asks his leader to please give him another chance, and he will remove God's head with his own hands. His leader says that 3 days later, he will take the crews to personally supervise the battle. And if he still can't handle God, the leader will deal with him himself. He asks the man not to let him down again. Another man who works for the boss says that it seems a more complete plan is necessary and it can't fail again. The blonde woman asks if they can start with just the women around him. The protagonist knows that 7 years ago at the New York autograph event, Karen Wilson lost a large sum of money to God and had 3 fingers cut off. He can't imagine that after all these years, she still wants revenge. In that case, the protagonist says he will have fun with her. The protagonist then calls Anjiji. She asks what he wants from her at this hour. So late, the protagonist asks her if she's willing to go on a cruise, surprising her to hear that. Who wouldn't be surprised? At the five-star hotel, Anjiji is enchanted by the beauty of the place. Trying to take a photo, Anjiji asks the protagonist where he found this place and says it's really beautiful. The protagonist says that this is nothing. There are so many places in the world that are more beautiful than this. The protagonist then hugs her around the waist and tells Anjiji that as long as she wants, he will accompany her everywhere. Anjiji kisses the protagonist on the cheek and says she'll take a shower first and then go to the beach to have some fun. The protagonist tells Anjiji that he's a little hungry and asks if she doesn't want to go find something to eat. She responds to the protagonist saying no. And then he can go to the restaurant alone. While Anjiji takes a shower, the protagonist wonders why he has to be a decent person. After hearing him grumble, she asks what he's talking about and tells him to hurry up and go eat. The hunger was real. Arriving at the restaurant, the protagonist calls his bodyguard Liu Hu and asks how things are at his house. Liu Hu tells the protagonist that they've located the source that's following him. He claims that they didn't notice anything wrong and thought he was just working. But rest assured, they'll stabilize things. The protagonist thinks that by paralyzing those assassins with a decoy, he can then wait for the old man to throw himself at him. And if the information is correct, Wilson's ship will arrive at night. Then Miyanyuro asks the protagonist for permission and inquires if she can sit with him, claiming that there are no more empty tables. The protagonist says it's fine and asks her to sit down. Some men look at Yanyuro and say that the girl is very beautiful. Having a pretty face and a nice body is extremely good. Then a woman who was sitting with one of the men commenting on Yanyuro asks where he's looking. Near the protagonist, Yanyuro thinks that she's sitting so close to that man, and he hasn't even looked at her. She wonders if he might be very shy. But then she changes her mind and thinks that maybe he's just pretending to be cold to attract her attention. She claims that she's seen many people like that, so it's a good idea not to start a conversation. The protagonist finishes his meal and leaves without saying a word, leaving Yanyuro completely alone. She's astonished that she didn't even get a glance. She thinks she's not attractive enough in the protagonist's eyes. Low self-esteem, really? After leaving the table, the protagonist wonders why that girl was staring at him just now. He wonders if she spilled soup on her clothes. As he passes by two men, the protagonist overhears their conversation while they look at the horizon, saying that the golden sun has arrived. The other man says it's truly huge and beautiful. Then one of them says that it's one of the best luxury cruise ships internationally, and it's worth sailing on it once in a lifetime. The other man tells the first man to dream big and says that the people who manage to board it are rich. He can't even think about it. Admiring the enormous ship, the man asks someone to take a photo of him with the ship in the background. Looking at the ship, the protagonist realizes that it's Wilson's ship approaching. As for the ending part with the channel message, here's how it would be translated. And that's today's story. If you liked it, leave a like to give some support, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Don't forget to comment what you thought and which story you'd like to see here. I'll always be replying to the comments, and the best stories you send, I'm bringing them here. Catch you later. Until the next videos.